Hello, my name is Gerard Robinson. I'm the Vice President for Education at the Advanced Studies in Culture Foundation located in Charlottesville, Virginia. We were founded in 1995 by Dr. James Hunter, who is a sociologist and a professor of social thought, religion, and culture at the University of Virginia. That book behind me, underneath the stained glass window, is called Culture War. And that's one of many books that he's written that's helped influence how we think about society and education. Since joining the foundation, I partnered with my colleague, Katherine, and we're putting together something called In Character. And it's an opportunity to get together a number of people who work in different segments of education, talk about society, about learning, about culture, and what it means. So I want to thank all of you for joining me. This is the second one. The first one was also with educators, and the second one is with educators, because for me, it's really tough to have any conversation about culture and not talk about schools and learning, but more importantly, to talk to the people who deliver the teaching and learning inside of the classroom. And given the fact that we have COVID-19 pandemic, what it's meant for the closure of schools, what does teaching and learning look like to educators? And we're going to have more of a conversation about that. So what I'm going to do first is give each one of you an opportunity to tell us your name. If you've won any award of note, you can share that with us. And then once we do a round robin, I will open up the first question. So I'm going to start with the good-looking guy. We have really more than one good-looking guy. The one to my right, Abdul, we'll start with you and move forward.
I am Abdul Wright. I am a Minnesota Teacher of the Year, 2016-17. I've been in education for 10 years now, my 10th year. I am very fortunate to teach in North Minneapolis, and I'm so sorry I can't remember the other part of what you said because my daughter is literally standing right here on the other side of the table.
And say hi to y'all. No problem. I'm the dad of 3 daughters, so if you want to come over and say hello, feel free to do so. Thank you, and look forward to talking more because Minneapolis has been a part of the conversation a lot over the last 2 months. Thank you for your time. Let me go to Cara.
Thank you.
Is it Cara or Cara?
It's Cara, yes. I'm Cara Pacarcik. I'm the 2018 Massachusetts Teacher of the Year. And I teach in Quincy, Massachusetts. And I am a biology and zoology teacher for high school students. And then I'll be starting my 15th year. I started teaching after about 10 years working as a marine biologist off the coast here in Massachusetts.
Excellent. Quincy, so John Adams somehow figures into that part of the world.
He does, yes. Both he and his son are both buried in Quincy. That's where their memorial is located. So, yeah, they're the city of presidents.
Yes. Michelle?
Hi, I'm Michelle Pearson. I'm a social studies educator and in actually Denver, Colorado, so I'm out west. Mm-hmm. I am also a historic preservationist, and that role intermixes with my teaching, especially since I really work around the social studies concepts, but I'm also a tech geek, do a lot of technology, and I'm working with that right now, particularly because we're working in this remote setting, but we use it all the time anyhow, because it's a good way to engage purposefully in the classroom. So thank you for having me today.
I'll look forward to more conversations about your work. Let's go to Michael.
Hi, my name is Mike Dunley, and I currently teach 3rd grade in southern rural New Jersey.
So Mike has lost power at his home, and he was still kind enough to join us. Well, we'll go back to Michael. Let's go over to Rebecca.
Hi there. Good afternoon from Los Angeles, California. My name is Rebecca Mieliwocki, and I am the 2012 California and National Teacher of the Year. I am typically a middle school teacher by day. That's where I spent the last 20 years. But now I am a TOSA, teacher on special assignment, specializing in new teacher induction and secondary professional development. And my particular obsession right now is looking at that sort of informal teacher-leader layer between classroom teacher and administrator, and working really hard in that space to bring teachers along with their confidence levels and their ability to lead and change and shape our profession in positive ways, and helping make admin really comfortable with employing and deploying them to do work that could make schools thrive.
I grew up in the Crenshaw district of Los Angeles, so it's always good to Here's someone with an LA connection. Thank you for joining us. Let's turn it over to Shawn.
Hello, I'm Shawn Sheehan. I'm the 2016 Oklahoma Teacher of the Year. I'm a math teacher, have been for the last 9 years, but this year I stepped out of the classroom to serve as my school district's government relations liaison. I'm here in North Texas, Lewisville, Texas, about 20 minutes north of Dallas. And Texas has a legislative session every other year, and so we have one coming up. And so that's why I've stepped out of the classroom to follow the education and engage in policy full-time just for the year.
And so the Oklahoma Teacher of the Year, now working in Texas, so that the Red River in your life is quite interesting.
Right. Yeah, that's a whole different conversation. But shortest answer is teacher pays a little better down this way. So my wife and I are both educators, and we were better able to provide for our family by making the move south.
Well, thank you. And thank you to all of you for providing me with just a glimpse into who you are. So let's go a little deeper. My first question is real simple. What attracted you to the teaching profession? And I'm going to pick on Cara first because you had a career in another field. What you teach in, career, and then teaching. Talk to us about that, and then in fact we'll go to Michelle, and we'll go from there.
Sure. I'm always a little embarrassed to answer this question because the real reason I went into education was because I needed health insurance. And it's an honest answer.
Yes.
I was working as a marine scientist and loving my job. I was out on the ocean every single day. I was working in informal education with the public, but also doing what I ultimately always wanted to do. And I was in one of those positions where I either needed to go full-time back to school and give up my position, or probably get about 5 other jobs just to make ends meet. And someone said, well, you'd be a great teacher. And I was like, okay. And I didn't really know much about the process. I didn't grow up in Massachusetts. So for me, all the teachers that I'd ever known went to school to be a teacher and went through that more traditional process. And so I started looking into it, and in Massachusetts, you can be a career changer and receive a preliminary license and give it a try. And someone, my former department head, saw something in me that I wasn't sure existed, and she believed in me, and I entered the classroom, cried for about the first 2 months because I thought it was the hardest job I'd ever experienced in my life, and quickly came to realize I really kind of came at this in a very flippant sort of way, just like, oh yeah, I'll be a teacher, and really began to appreciate this as the profession that it is, and fell in love with it. And that's why I'm still here 15 years later.
Great, and thanks for the straight talk. We always love straight talk, so I appreciate it. Michelle, historic preservation, something very unique and important to the work you're involved in. How did that influence your decision?
Well, to be very frank, mine isn't a pretty answer either. I don't know that it ever is. I had a lot of passions and a lot of interests while I was in college. I actually worked in and lived and went to school in Fredericksburg, Virginia, which is a hotbed of history, right? And really a host for a lot of opportunities in both formal teaching and informal teaching. I was volunteering as a teacher ranger teacher with the National Park Service and receiving my degree, but at the same time looking at becoming a teacher as well. And as I stepped into that decision-making time that we always have towards our latter part of our college years, where you have to decide what you're going to do when you grow up, kind of, it was a hard choice because I was in a situation where social studies positions were hard to come by. And at the same time, moving into the Park Service and the historic preservation realm as a female in particular at that time was kind of difficult. And so I decided that I really could make a difference for stories and the nature of who we are as America come alive for kids if I stepped into the classroom. And so I really moved into a lens of, I need to have boots on the ground. I need to be teaching so that we can illuminate the stories across our nation that aren't told. And I've tried to live that. When I was the 2011 Colorado Teacher of the Year, they always asked this question. And to be honest with you, I fully believe that we need to make sure that every story's at the table. And so that's really how I became passionate about what I do. And I didn't leave historic preservation behind. Instead, I decided to empower my kids to be part of that. And today we do it together side by side. And so that's really gratifying to be able to do that.
Excellent. Katherine, we're going to give you an opportunity to do, I guess, 2 for 1. Tell us about who you are and what attracted you to teaching.
Sure. I'm Katherine Bassett. I have the honor of working with Gerard at ASCF, as well as doing some other things as an education consultant. I am the New Jersey State Teacher of the Year 2000, and I am one of the founders of the revitalized NSTOY and served as its president and CEO for 5.5 years. I also served at Pearson and ETS as a researcher and assessment designer and specialist. And why did I go into teaching? I was voted the shyest person in my high school class. I never saw myself ever being able to get up in front of a group of anybody, be it adults, children, or babies, or even animals. I was a biology major in college. I wanted to be a physical therapist. And I got a D in chemistry, organic chemistry, Cara. And but I don't get D's, and that didn't go down well in my family. I am the first person in my family to go to college, and my father's response was, "You were partying, weren't you?" And I was like, party? Like, I didn't even go on a date in high school. Like, what parties would I be going to? I had organic chemistry, calculus, and biology for biology majors in my first semester freshman year. No, he said, well, D's are not acceptable. And so I changed my major. And I was I had not declared a major for a while. And my roommate was a library media major. And she said, why don't you come to some of my classes? You read all the time, you love books, just come with me, see what you think. And I went and fell in love. And this is what brought me into the classroom.
Great story. And to think that you're shy, there are a couple of people who actually laugh because we know you. And shy, not so sure, but we're learning more things about you. Thanks for sharing your story. Shawn, you're in Texas. You're now in government relations. Talk to us about what attracted you into the profession in the first place, and how maybe that's even influencing what you're doing right now.
Sure. So immediately before teaching, I was a job coach for adults with disabilities, and I kept seeing this trend where I had these recent high school graduates. They were underprepared for work and life after graduating. And so I wanted to get on the front end of that. And so I don't think I specified, but my background is special education. I got my master's in special education in Oklahoma and started teaching. And then I broadened my scope and started teaching ELL student populations as well. And there's a natural bridge when you're working with those really just high needs populations, special education, ELL, where you're frustrated at the lack of resources. And so I kept digging and digging, asking why is this a constant struggle? And so 2 years ago, I applied for a fellowship, and I was on the Hill working for a congressman in the House of Reps. And so I called my superintendent after that year, and I said, listen, I've acquired this legislative skill set that I can't table, but I miss kids. So like, is there a way for me to do both? And he gave the green light I taught ELL math for the first part of the day last year, and then came over to the administration center and represented the school district in government relations at the local level, state, and federal. So now the ask was, hey, I think we need you to do this full time because we've got Texas legislative session coming up in 2021. Also, we need efforts to get out the vote because teachers are not voting in the way that they should, like in the numbers that they should, not in the way. And so that's what I'm tackling now, is just kind of how do we elevate that educator voice on the policy front. And then at the local level, how do we, I want to make it scalable. Is like, how many classroom teachers have moved on to actually follow legislation and then represent their school district with their legislators? And it's just so powerful, because when I was going to when I Zoom with the legislative staff and they say, oh yeah, like I was teaching in March when everything shut down, not 10 years ago when TikTok and Snapchat weren't a thing, like I taught just a few months ago. And it's not at all what you guys are saying. Like the bill that you've introduced is problematic for this reason, and this reason. And their eyes are they're kind of taken aback because they're like, what? We don't usually speak with, are you a lobbyist? You're like, nah, I'm a classroom teacher who knows his policy. And so, yeah, that's where I am now. And it's just a blessing to be able to do this kind of work now.
And special education is so important throughout the field. We know, this year, in fact, is the 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act, and what that has meant for working adults, 61 million across the country, then 6 million students in our system with some type of disability. So thanks for that, and also for making the connection to policy. So Rebecca, same question. What attracted you? And then you took what you did state, became national, and how is that influencing what you're doing right now?
Well, I'm sad that you're ending on me for the what brought you to teaching question, because my story, I'm not a preacher's kid, I'm a teacher's kid. Both mom and dad are teachers, and that meant that I was an absolute misfit and a near terrorist in the classroom. I was an absolute goofball who gave my teachers a run for the money, and when I look back on it, I just cringe. I cringe at how I tormented my teachers and made their work so much harder. But after graduating, I had planned to attend law school, and I was working in publishing while I gathered funds for that. And publishing wasn't doing it for me. By the time I was a working individual, law school didn't seem that appealing to me either. So went totally creative and worked in Hollywood as a floral designer to the stars, just to indulge the creative side of me, because I do have a passion for creativity. That wasn't it either. And my husband, who is my better 3/4, not just my better half, said, why don't you make a list of all the things you want to do the rest of your life and the things you never ever want to do again. I made the list and I showed it to him, and he just started laughing, like maniacal laughing. And I was like, okay, smart guy, why don't you fill me in on the joke? And he said, it's super clear. You're supposed to be a teacher. Look at your list. And I just fought that, kicking and screaming all the way till my first day of teaching. And within 30 seconds of meeting 7th graders, I was all in. Totally natural, felt like breathing air, felt like I was home. The hard parts weren't hard. The easy parts were a breeze. I love faculty meetings, grading papers, working with teachers, collaborating, going to conferences. And I just thought, where has this been all my life? Of course, my parents laugh now. But they weren't laughing so hard in the White House when they got to meet Barack Obama. That was a really happy, joyous moment. And so in terms of like the national viewpoint, I feel like that's been a very powerful boost for me to help understand that the circumstances on the ground for teachers everywhere can vary, and people are experiencing vastly different kinds of school experiences, whether you're a teacher or a kid. And we have to know as much as we can so that we can advocate for one another and fight for what's right, especially right now in the middle of a crisis. It also, for me personally, I experienced a particular anger and tension around the idea of scaling up solutions. In my year of recognition, all people would tell me was, oh, we just need to clone people like you. Or if you have a good idea, let's make it work everywhere, in Nashville, in New York. And that just angered me, because so many times in my 24 years, I've been handed a binder of something that worked in Pennsylvania and told to make it work in Burbank. Right. They didn't know our kids, they didn't know me, they didn't know our curriculum. And then of course we get left behind, and when it doesn't work, we get blamed for that. And that's something I knew when I took myself, around the country and the globe. And I promised never to talk like that or speak like that or engage in endeavors that involved scaling. And instead I went in the opposite direction. And I came back home and I said, I will only work on things that I can confirm work right here, low to the ground for teachers to make things better. And if that's a good idea, I'll share it. But I'm never going to be involved in making something a big scaled shared national thing, because we're too unique, we're too individual. So that's my perspective. It's small ball for sure if you're into baseball analogies, but that's okay. I'm okay with that. If I spend my life on that work, it's been worthwhile.
And you made a really good point about the difference among student population in cities. I mean, Bakersfield, Berkeley, Baldwin Hills, all in California, different sets of dynamics across the place. And thank you for also talking about the importance of saying, you know what, I'm not going to scale, because right now that's the sexy thing, and that's where a lot of money's going. But you're saying that's good for some, but I'm going to do something different. Thank you for sharing that. Abdul, same question. What attracted you to the teaching profession, and in particular where you work now in Minneapolis? How is that unfolding?
When I'm from Chicago, so when I moved to Minnesota, we lived in a shelter in North Minneapolis. And so I just felt like, and then I lived in North Minneapolis. So to me, I always looked at what inspired me to be a teacher, and it was the babies in the community. I worked at this after school program in North Minneapolis at a school, and I got to see a lot and experience a lot and be influenced by the children who lived in the same neighborhood that I was doing this after school teaching job at. And I didn't recognize the impact that I was having on them at the time, but I did recognize the impact that they were having on me, and it gave me a sense of importance. And I recognized very early that I love serving. I love helping, I love influencing things for the better, and I love being of use and empowering others. And so for me, education was like, for some it was my lifelong calling. Like I've been fortunate since a very early age to know that I wanted to serve. And then I was fortunate again to know that I was able to serve through teaching. And that's been what I've been doing. I had the opportunity to teach at a lot of different schools. I was a Black male with a degree in English and education. Like, that's anywhere I could be. And I chose to be right in North Minneapolis, right in the most fragile community, or one of the most fragile communities, because I felt like I want to influence and impact young people who come from communities just like mine. And since I've become the teacher of the year, I've had every opportunity to leave the classroom, and people always ask me, why do you stay if you got to work harder, if your days are longer? And it's because my babies deserve quality. And if I'm one quality individual that they see has an opportunity to leave, but I choose to stay, I want them never to look at what that says about me, but what that says about them and how valuable they are. And then to have the lens of, with my platform of being teacher of the year, to grow as a man and to become more affirmed in who I am and my identity and how I show up in spaces unapologetically. I think that's, well, not I think, I know that I value that above all. And so to prepare young people to be successful in a world where everyone may not have their lived experience, or may not come from where they come from, or may have advantages that they didn't have, yet know that they are valuable in those spaces and that they deserve a seat at the table. That's everything, and that's what I do. So I teach English language arts, and I teach middle school because I think that giving them the foundational skills that they need to thrive in these advanced placement classes or IB classes or any high school setting, or to help them learn to advocate for themselves, or, give them a sense of affirmation and belief before they, venture out into the world. That's everything to me. And so that's why I teach, and that's why I've been a teacher, and that's why I teach in North Minneapolis.
And the part of Minneapolis you're in, as you said, is fragile and a lot of challenges. A couple of times I had a chance to go and visit. In fact, President Obama placed one of the Promised Neighborhood initiatives in your city, in part to do your work. And also, to put in perspective, as you mentioned, as a Black male, only 2% of the teaching force in the U.S. are Black men. When I finished school, I taught 5th grade in Los Angeles, in part to start earlier for the same reason. So thank you for sharing that story. Shawn, you talked about the fact that, you were doing work before everyone went virtual as we know it today. There are a lot of conversations inside the profession and outside about what does this mean for students. But let's have a conversation about what it means for educators. How has finding yourself removed from the classroom as you were before, how has it impacted teaching and learning for you in the role you're in? I won't call on anyone. Anyone can jump in as you feel.
For me, when this pandemic first hit, I was confused, and then I got really hopeful because I viewed it as an opportunity. I think that education is inequitable at its foundation. I think that there's so many inequitable pillars that create this gap where people, and I come back to fragile communities because of you, Gerard, when we got to go to your event, and I really got to learn a lot about the research and why go with fragile communities in the name and the power in that name, because it speaks to systemic issues. And for me, I saw so many inequitable systems and pillars in my fragile community, and I said, good. We've never had more than 30 computers in our school. Now my CEO is talking about buying one for every single child in the next week and a half, right? Personalized learning, more communication with families, all of these things. And I watched as educators in my own building, and maybe even educators across the country, just talk about how young people have so much going on. And it's like, so then are we going to further these gaps? Are we going to, I felt like I was battling. I was fighting against an entire system, and I realized that I'm not battling, illusionist like systems. I'm going against people who are comfortable within these systems and who don't want to learn and who are choosing to say there's a cap on what we're capable of because it's convenient for them. And I had to recognize that this very thing that we're going through is how this entire system has been created and kind of scaled up, right? Going back to your point. And it creates a lack of quality. When you scale up, and I understand your fear, Rebecca, when we scale up, we lose quality and we lose that individual ability to recognize communities intimately. And so I still view it as an opportunity. So I went from hopeful to angry to inspired to be a change agent. And I think that I get to be a change agent and create the type of educational experience for young people that I think that, okay, yes, we're not in the building right now, but we can enjoy learning and we will learn, because the same way we're on this virtual call and we're learning from one another and growing our perspectives and our wisdom is the same way young people can grow and learn because they deserve it. So it's our job as educators to recognize what do our babies deserve and align everything from our mindsets to the lack of excuses, to our actions, to our words, to our systems, to our courage, to align with what they deserve, not what we think can be done.
Thank you.
I want to jump in. I really agree with Abdul in a lot of this. When this first happened, some of us were already engaging with technology, so the online shift was not a huge piece, but for so many others it was. And I really firmly believe that it created some gaps, but in the hopeful side of how Abdul spoke to it, it also created community. We started thinking about some innovative ways to jump over these barriers, to say, we've got to do this a different way. If I've got to go sit outside of a school with a Wi-Fi and have kids social distance to be able to access, I'm going to do that. If my kids need food and I'm going to get it, I'm going to drive it to them, but I'm going to make that personal connection with them at that time, to talk to them, to not use just a computer modality, but to use a cell phone or a letter. We did a lot of handwriting. We did some of the old traditional pieces that allowed that personal connection. But as a teacher leader, it was also a huge challenge because we saw those systematic breakdowns become very open and very exposed. And as we moved into a conversation of what will this world look like for us in education as we return, we started to see also not only the shoring up in some districts of allowing teacher leadership voice to come to the table to design these, to innovative think around what our systems will look like as we move forward, but also the shutdown of voice where people said, no, you don't know better. We've made the decisions for you. We're going to tell you what to do. Mm-hmm. And I know as many of us, and I bet we've all done it in some way, but we had to think innovatively in some cases to step out of the box and figure out what community connections, legislative connections, personal connections we could make to change the narrative so every kid is present, but also so every teacher is present. And I think that something we forget about, we have a very student-centered profession, which is important, but the leadership, mental health, and support of our profession is also important. And when we talk about the gaps of skills for kiddos, we have some gaps of skills for teachers too. I have teachers that don't have a smartphone, that don't use Chromes, that don't do this because their personal connection with kiddos is different. Is it wrong? No, but we've got to figure out how to empower each other to change both systems, how we're serving our kiddos and how we're serving our teachers, so that we kind of empower the whole thing. And it's taken some really collective conversations and some that have been really hard. I mean, when you ask the question, Gerard, I think about it as almost the Bitmoji thing you get when you pull up Bitmoji on Snapchat and there's 100 things you can choose for your feeling of the day. That's kind of how it's been the last 12 weeks. You know, it's like, well, which Bitmoji fits today? But I think we're all committed to all the different people, including our parents. And, you know, this is a fine line we're walking during this time, but we've all got to be committed to those kids and to each other, or we won't get through this next piece. And I think that's really, really important. But I think opportunity and hope and really community is where the core is here.
Thank you.
I would love to speak to what Abdul and Michelle started with, which is the crisis has shined a really bright light on some of the broken places for teachers who enjoyed controlling kids more than teaching them and did not have a true and dear sense of intentionality around planning instruction and thinking about best practices and what kids need, because all of a sudden we find ourselves in a scenario where we have a limited amount of time with our kids and we don't have any control over what's happening in their homes or whether they can access what we're delivering. So if you're a teacher who has been down a wrong path for a real long time and you feel real comfortable and confident there, this new world where you have to carefully curate really high quality stuff for kids and families to help with, but you might not have attendees. You might not have kids that can do that or can't get on a device. So you're going to have to flex in every direction for kids. I'm loving watching the impact it's having on those teachers. At the same time, I understand my job is not to just sort of enjoy the hubris, but instead leap in and support and to bring them to a better place. That is my role and my responsibility. But I'm thankful for this crisis because there would never, ever have been a moment in history where 100% of teachers needed to get competent and comfortable with technology overnight. There would never be a world where 100% of teachers would have to go the extra mile for kids who need help. And this is that moment. And we have to seize on it, like Michelle says, kind of exemplify what good practice looks like Abdul said, what care and compassion looks like, so that we can try to bring back together broken systems better.
Thank you.
And this is Michael. I would like to jump in because I think the agency, you often hear that word associated with teachers, but I find being a classroom teacher, I've seen a lot of student agency and student autonomy in this time, because they were given so much more freedom to follow their own interests, direct their own learning, take an assignment, and go much further than what maybe the initial parameters were. And it was exciting to see learning become so individually tailored by these students. And also the involvement, we entered everybody's homes. And in a weird sort of way, it took the separation to become a lot closer. Because I would hold kids back after, group Zooms and just to chat, and they would fill you in on things that you would never have a chance to actually get to speak about in school. You're busy, so busy going through the day, the bell schedule, the lunch, the snack, all these things, but given one-to-one chances to really check in on how they were doing. And because there was this storm going on in everyone's lives, you were asking the right questions and getting insight into their lives in a way that we never really would have done if we were still in the classroom. And the involvement of the families, it was just tremendous how much the impact of what we would have been doing in like global perspectives or talking about race to an all-white classroom. Now we were talking to all-white families. And so it was really interesting to see how it just redesigned the entire landscape. And it was a chaotic scene of innovation, creativity, and a lot of change, positive change.
Good points. Anyone else want to weigh in?
Yeah, I wanted to add, I really feel like, I remember, I'm sure we all have that moment. We're going to be like, 90 and be like, I remember the day they closed the building, but I truly remember my students just, what are we going to do? There was this, they were so worried about what was going to happen. And, you know, I just remember thinking, I don't know what we're going to do. But at the same time, I think not that idea of not knowing, it took me back to that very first week of being a teacher. And as I said earlier, I didn't know what I was doing. I had no idea what I was doing when I moved from my previous career into the classroom. I didn't have an education class under my belt. I mean, I was just thrown right in there. And I felt a little like that again. And I thought, well, okay, let's take that vulnerability and let's roll with it. Let's figure out, like, how do I want to refocus this? How do I want to figure out, what did I really hold as important that maybe I've lost in all of these years? And so I think that, yes, I agree with everything that's been said so far, but I also feel like for me personally, it's really brought me back to what are the things that are really, truly important in terms of learning for students, but also relationships for our students. And, you know, the very first day, well, we had 3 weeks of this sort of weird limbo here in Massachusetts that we weren't really expected to be doing anything because we didn't really know what was happening. And I reached out to my students and asked them to just, you know, pop in on a Zoom so we could say hello. And I was surprised by how many of them showed up. And how many of them said, like, Miss P, can we have a joke? Or Miss P, can you tell us one of your funny stories? And I just thought, like, this is what's important. This is what we need to be thinking about and looking at. And yes, the curriculum is important and all of those learning aspects, but when it really comes down to it, if I didn't have those relationships, they wouldn't have shown up there. And I wouldn't have seen them for weeks until we figured out what was going on. And so there's so many different aspects to this, but for me, I think that was what I cherished the most, is that I really thought about, okay, who am I as a teacher? I think I lost some of that in all of, you know, the years that I had just been like, oh, I could just pull this out of the file cabinet and here we go, you know, but who was I really, and what did I really want them to accomplish in that time that we were at home? And that's now on the forefront of my mind, as however we're going to do this in the fall, what do I want to focus on? And how do I make it less about some list of things that they're supposed to learn and more about the joy of learning is really what I want to focus on.
You know, Cara, I just couldn't agree more. It's like, who am I becoming still, right? Like, we have to humble ourselves to recognize, like, we're always becoming. We're always unlearning and learning. And if we're not doing both of those as educators, then we're falling short. And this is the one profession this is one of few professions. I think any service, when you go into service, right, you are saying, I am committed to sacrificing my life. However big that sacrifice is or consequential those sacrifices are, I am sacrificing something in regards to my own benefit for the well-being of something much bigger than myself. And so when you look at educating during the pandemic, it's very easy to get caught up in the world and what they say is best for teachers and how they pity us. But it's like, we know what we signed up for. And we're telling you to be hopeful and recognize that some days my daughters are upset with me because I haven't taken them to the park yet. And some days we can't go on this walk because I have a student who lives 30 minutes away who has no access to this Chromebook, and I need to go to the school, sacrifice my safety, take that to them just to give them an opportunity. This isn't coming from, y'all, whoever's watching, this isn't coming from a place where look at what Michael is doing right now. Like, this is not coming from a place where we're telling you to be hopeful and naive. This is to be steadfastly hopeful. And that's something different, to be unapologetically hopeful and courageous when everybody around you tells you, you don't have to. Like, we know, but we choose to because it's an honor and it's what our babies deserve.
You hit on some interesting points. There's different themes coming up. We see you as teachers, your students see you as teachers. They often don't think you have another life. You just show up in the building. Some of you have children, some of you are married, some of you are caring possibly for another adult. Talk to us about, and this is something I think people totally miss, talk to us about what it's like not only to remain an educator, but what is that impact for you as mom, dad, caregiver, friend? how do you guys take care of each other in situations like this? Because you know you and what you do. So I just throwing it out there. Shawn, let's just kick it off with you, and then Katherine, and then everyone else can just go ahead and weigh in.
Sure. So, we already have a lot of things on our plate, and COVID it took the plate, it turned it into a paper plate, and we're supposed to balance it on a yardstick. So
Right.
my wife and I are both educators, and we both had classes. So we had to carefully fine tune our schedules in such a way that one of us we found out real quickly we couldn't both teach and have office hours at the same time because the Wi-Fi was no good at that point for anybody. So we had a schedule. But we also had a 3-year-old who wanted some form of attention. And so she was kicking in the doors and screaming. And so you'd kind of do that, like, I'm with my class. This is not a gender role thing. This is would you come get her so I can do my job? And it was stressful, right? It was really hard. And for those, I'm someone who, I don't live near my family. Family's all out of state. They're not in Texas. And so the typical things that we would fall back on for those of us that maybe we like to engage with others, I could talk it out with people, all that kind of went out the window, right? I would love to like go just meet up with my people on Friday. We'll go get some, wings, have a drink, and all that's not an option anymore. And so you kind of tried to replace it with FaceTime or those things as best you could, but unsuccessfully. So at least that was my experience now. And so if anything, what I see from my perspective is like it has really highlighted the interconnectedness of education to all other facets of life, right? Like it really, the issue that I had in March was that, so the relationship that we fall back on, and my student population consists exclusively of newcomers. So absent the language and not having a translator, I was up a creek. Like right. I didn't have the luxury of calling home and checking in on the kids because I couldn't call. If they answered, my Spanish is not good enough to communicate the need to do some form of work, that I was just checking in. And on the flip side, my kids were not open enough to say, I've been kicked out of this temporary living place, which I know happened, right? Mm-hmm. And for my student from South Korea, like we just kind of looked at each other, and then, math, you kind of faked your way through it. And so the layers of complexity of just like trying to be an educator in 2020 with COVID, with all the other stuff that's happening, mm-hmm. Who knew? Like none of us could have ever known how like deep and challenging this was going to be. But the silver lining is, I think Rebecca was talking about, is like we are now forced to reconcile those issues. We are now forced to talk about the digital divide, to talk about affordable housing, to talk about, the language barriers and the access for our students who need accommodations and occupational therapy that we know they're not getting any of it. You can't get occupational therapy via Zoom in a meaningful way, right? So a whole can of worms. But we're educators. We do the best we can, and we just move forward.
Thank you. Katherine, your thoughts?
So I think I have 3 thoughts in response to your very thought-provoking question. The first is from a personal perspective. I have a daughter who is immune suppressed. She takes oral chemo every day, and she gets intravenous chemo every 6 weeks. And so when COVID happened, she was still in law school, and law school was still in person. And this was sort of exploding around us. And I was thinking, why are you still going to class? And I know that many at that point of the P-12 schools had shut down. I was actually with Cara on a day in Massachusetts when this happened. And suddenly the law school did make the decision to close. And so I watched from the perspective of somebody who had my own child who was a student, to the perspective of somebody who was working with teachers in a professional capacity, watching them find their way to educate their students, to the perspective of listening to the struggles of the students in their classrooms. And so I had those 3 different perspectives. And then on top of that, I have a sister who teaches 3-year-olds in preschool. And I was listening to how was she teaching online. teaching 3-year-olds and the struggles that she and her 3-year-old's parents were having. And so there's that personal perspective. Secondly, from a professional perspective, I was, as Abdul said, and said so beautifully, when we are presented with very dangerous and very confusing situations, that often creates opportunity. And it is a wise person who sees those opportunities. And I was so devastatingly disappointed in the school leaders who didn't see those opportunities. I remember working with one group of teachers, and I won't name the state, with whom I was working, who were told, we're only doing enrichment. Do not introduce any new material. Only do enrichment.
Okay.
And I was blown away, not in a good way. And so watching how different school leaders at the local district and state level came to terms with this. I won't even touch the federal level. And then thirdly, watching the shift in the culture of leadership within schools. And as the people on this call know, I am particularly invested in teacher leadership. And back in 2012, I was doing a research study at a school in Maine that had introduced a one-to-one initiative. And they were going through a cultural upheaval as they discovered that the people who were the teacher leaders, the more experienced teachers, the people with 15 to 20 years in, were now the students, because they didn't have the slightest idea what one-to-one even meant, let alone how to turn on one of those devices. And I saw that same cultural shift now. As we are asking all teachers during the past few months to move to a technology environment, many of them were not ready for it, they were not prepared for it, and they didn't know how to do it. And so suddenly they became learners again, as Abdul said earlier. And that is a gift. To be a learner again is a gift, but not everybody saw it that way. Does that help?
Oh, absolutely.
Can I speak to that point, Gerard?
I'm gonna weigh in.
I'm so sorry. No, because I could shut up. I really could shut up and let. Okay. Katherine, that's exactly it though, right, y'all? And like what I'm hearing from everybody else is it's just like it was in leadership that I recognized that teaching is one of the few professions where people don't like to be criticized. We don't like to be evaluated. We don't want any of that, but every other profession does. Doctors are being criticized while they operate, right after an operation. Any other field, you're always criticized. And as educators, we have to embrace that more. We have to be willing to be vulnerable and trust that, you know what? We have to be vulnerable and trust that, you know what? At the end of the day, I have an opportunity here to grow myself and humble ourselves to that. The greatest teachers are the ones who listen the most. And ironically, I say that as I'm talking, but that's what it is, right? You sit with situations, you sit with experience, you sit with people, you sit with different perspectives, you sit with the lack of knowledge, not the lack of what you don't know, and you be courageous enough to understand it, right? And there are times that present themselves for us to do that. Shawn, similar to you, you work with a group of newcomers. Our school has a huge East African population, so a huge set of newcomers, right? And during the month of Ramadan, I'll fast with my students. And so I remember a few years ago, I fasted with my students on like the first week, and then I went to the masjid to pray. And my dad is an imam. So I thought I walked into it with like, I know a little bit, but I only knew a tiny bit, right? And then you're sitting in the masjid and you're like, oh, which hand do I wash first? Which ear do I wash? And it's like, you look around and it's like, I'm supposed to know. And I'm afraid that if I don't know, and then it's like, this is what my students feel. You have to put yourself in those positions, right? And this is what my students feel. And what do I tell them? So you ask. And then when you ask, you grow, right? And you're able to be more of use and to be more intimate in our compassion. So I couldn't agree more, y'all. Just everything. Like, I was starting slow, y'all know, but this is like nerding out.
Yeah, I agree on that point as well. I think it was important for our students to see us in that vulnerability, to see us learning, to watch us make mistakes, because, you know, if you're a veteran teacher, like I said, you just you know what you're doing. You kind of go with what you know. And, you know, I'm constantly making mistakes, and students are, it's like a game in my classroom to try to find Miss P's typo on every sheet of paper that I hand out. And so I think that was definitely something that I noticed, was that I really became even more able to admit when I needed help, when I didn't know how to do something. You know, our students and their technology skills, they know so much more than I do. And they'd be like, well, Miss P, if you click this button and then you do that, I'm like, wow, thanks. Like, I really didn't know how to do that. And I think it was important for them to see that. And one other thing for me, I don't have children of my own, and I'm not married. And so I was in this house literally by myself for weeks at a time. And so for me, I felt it important to share that with my students too, to have that similarity with them. Many of my students were not allowed to leave their house at all, because, you know, their parents were keeping them safe. And so they would say, oh, I feel so trapped in here. And I would admit that I felt the same way. You know, I really miss seeing my friends. I really miss being able to hug my best friend, or, you know, my family is not in this state either. And so for me to be able to show that vulnerability as well, and to show what I was going through, to help myself, like, oh, well, maybe we can, you know, let's all like stick our heads out the window and breathe fresh air at the same time. And then we can kind of be together in the same place. And just that sense of admitting that it's hard. It's hard if you have someone that you're taking care of. It's hard if you don't have anyone that you're taking care of. And letting them see that, I think, again, it just helps form those relationships. They see you as a person, because as you said earlier, Gerard, you know, sometimes they don't even realize. I had a student very early on in my career ask me if I had an air mattress in the back of my room. And I was like, no. Oh, you go home at night? Yes, yeah. I do. I have a house, you know? So I think, again, what we're all experiencing in this just unbelievable time is important not to cover up. And it's important to share the struggles with our students, so they realize what I'm feeling, what my family is experiencing, what I'm seeing, is something that other people are experiencing too. And so for me, that was really important.
And thanks for opening up your story about single in a place, because of the whole aspect of that we often overlook. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I wanted to add to that. Oh, Michelle, you go.
Nope, you go.
Okay. Cara's point is what I wrote down, which is, you know, as I get older, I've started to do some work around like whose stories aren't getting told and who needs attention and is not asking for it. And so like in the last week, I've seen really strong people crack and be kind of falling apart. And so finding a way to reach out to people that you wouldn't think normally need it, they absolutely need it. And then like single people, I have a single best friend, and she wouldn't admit it, but I know she's spoken to the level of loneliness that is unending, because we don't have an end date for this. There's so much unknown. We don't know when this is going to be over. So it's very bleak. And also for the elderly, my own 80-year-old parents, I feel them sort of declining as they are not able to be socially connected to people. So we have to find ways to reach out to people, even those we don't think need it. They absolutely do, and find an easy way in to talk about that honestly. And then about the whole like the parent backlash on social media about how terrible this all is. I feel personally responsible for jumping into that space, because even if it was terrible in a lot of places, what happened from March to May, that's that positive chaos that Michael was talking to. these things we've described, teachers learning how to be learners, technology getting integrated widely, like that is a mess. It is a big old mess, and we aren't doing it right. But if you're a parent, what you're watching and witnessing on the front line is a profession that is absolutely being broken apart and put back together. And I hope better. But I feel obligated as a teacher and a teacher leader to jump into those spaces, not to defend us, but to describe what's happening and how much growth is going to come out of this, and to be patient, stay with us. We are your allies. We're here to help your kids. We are doing the best we can. We can do better. We will do better. But I think that's a task for all of us to jump in and have those conversations with parents and kind of bring their stress levels down.
Great points, Michelle.
You know, thank you. You just embodied some of what I was going to say, but I want to touch on another point too. And I think whether you have children or not, to talk about your experiences and that vulnerability is critical. I have 3 boys. They're all living in a different world right now. One is going to college. One is not working because of an immune issue. The other one is a hands-on apprentice and is out in the field. And we're talking about, what does career and technical ed look like? What are these specialized programs that we've been working with students and developing look like now? What do these trainings do for our kiddos? And we have to remember those special populations. And you know, I've seen it in some senses where going online, the conversation has been, well, here's the core content, but we can't teach these classes and we can't look at this. But I think one of the biggest pieces is, for me, bringing the kids to the table to ask the kids what they envision this to be. And we've really tried that this summer, and it hasn't been perfect, and it's been messy. And I have lunch twice a week with my middle schoolers still that graduated, just because that's what we do. And I had to change a meeting yesterday and they had a fit, but we all got together today. And one of the questions that I think is really prominent from them today was, Miss P, we don't know what's going on, but our future is what's happening right now. And it took a minute for me, and I thought, you know, that is really a way to look at it. Their future is happening. In their very simple phrase, over lunch on Zoom, they were saying they're watching, they're seeing these pieces. And I think if we are, just as everybody has said, open with them to say, this isn't perfect, it's good, we're going to work together, I think that makes it important too. And I think we can't forget that all voices have to be there. And sometimes we consider that all voices are adults, but really it's maybe everybody. So.
And I'd like to jump in and just talk about fear, because I think there was a lot of fear present in my students. I work with 7, 8, 9-year-olds, and there was so much unknown. And Katherine and I both live in an area that got hit very hard by Hurricane Sandy. And using that analogy of a storm that destroys, you can always rebuild, like what Rebecca was saying, how we're rebuilding this profession and learning and what it looks like. But while we're doing the rebuilding, a second storm is now starting to form. You know, this new, what's the fall going to be like, the second wave. And I think it's very difficult to rebuild when you're now afraid again. So fear has become a really big element in our classrooms, whether they be face-to-face or virtual. And the students, it affects learning, it affects families, both your own, as you mentioned in your question earlier about, you know, having your children and balancing your personal life with your professional life, but just seeing families. I've had more parents reach out to me because of their fears and their concerns. And that's really, I think, something I've never had to deal with before in my 18 years, is the level of fear and how much it's affecting the learning.
That's very real.
And Gerard, Shawn had to go because his building was closing down.
Oh, no problem. So for those of you who were watching us, if you saw the wave, that was for Shawn. So thank you. Well, as you know, all good things must come to an end, and I wish this would not have to end. I want to make sure I respect everyone's time, but I will give you a chance to do this. A number of words that begin with C were mentioned tonight: community, care, competency, and creativity. There was an educator mid part of the 20th century named Septima Clark, and she worked in the South, and she said, I like chaos because from chaos comes creativity. And so if you want to, each one of you want to offer some parting words to your colleagues, whether it's about creativity or chaos. What would you say? We'll start with you, Cara.
First again. Well, I guess what I would say, you know, I can't say that I always like chaos, because I really like things to be in order. And I like to be organized and have everything in its place. But at the same time, I think chaos gets our adrenaline going to the point that we really start to dig into areas of our brain that maybe haven't been active before. And that's where that creativity starts to shine. And for anyone going into the fall right now with that fear that Michael talked about, and the chaos that we're seeing everywhere, and all of these different feelings, give yourself some flexibility, give yourself some grace, and try out your ideas. You know, creativity, we don't know if it's going to work, these creative ideas, unless we try them. And so give yourself that space to really try new things, and use your students and their creativity as well, because they have so many ideas and so many great ways of thinking about activities, but also they know how they learn a lot of times. They know what works for them, and let them tell you, let them help you. And really, the other C word you said, bring it in as a community endeavor, bring it all together.
Thank you. Abdul?
I think that we have one thing I'm trying to be better at is recognize the importance of joy, and how joy and where joy comes from. And joy comes from things that we cultivate and create just with fun activities. And joy also comes from achievement. There is no greater satisfaction than the ability to achieve or believe that you can achieve. And so as we, you know, embark on this next school year, let's look at what it means to be joyful, and how do we nurture and cultivate a culture of joy for our students that isn't just fun.
Thank you. Michelle?
I think that sometimes it may be easy to be complacent in this, another C word, to say that, you know, we're just going to take it as it comes and we're not going to move forward or grow. And I worry about that sometimes. But I look at this as a chance to really look for the future. Our dreams haven't changed, but I think it's time for us to dream some new dreams, and to do that not only individually, but collectively, because our future's at hand. And that sounds like a really large word or statement, but I believe innately that if we believe that dreams can still be accomplished, we can foster that within our kiddos. So through literature and writing and discussion and personal touch points with them, I think that we have the ability that even in this circumstance to move them towards their dreams. And frankly, to move all of us towards the dream of making sure every student receives what they dream of and want as we move forward together.
Thank you. Rebecca?
Well, my message to educators would be that I would hope that out of the chaos and the creativity of the moment might come some clarity, a clarity of purpose. And if you put your purpose right in front of you as you try to solve these challenges, the way becomes very clear. You know, if you remember that you're here to teach so that students can learn, and to connect with students so they know that their potential is something worth spending time with and growing, and that they do have a place in this world, even in the middle of a crisis. And that your job is to help them feel that, know that, connect with them, and that you care and love them. If you have that level of clarity, you're not going to go wrong.
Thank you. Michael?
So as I was listening, I was hoping nobody would use my word, right? Collaborate. Courageously collaborate. I think doing this on your own is impossible. And I think the collaboration is not typically with other educators, but with parents. We have to co-teach. I've taught inclusion for 15 years, which means I've really enjoyed the art of co-teaching. And now I co-teach with a bunch of parents as well. So I think that courageously collaborate, because it brings in maybe skills and ideas that you wouldn't have done, and it pushes you out of your comfort zone. And I think that's where we grow.
Thank you. Katherine? The shy one.
So Michael took part of my word. My word was going to be courage. We, in my family, lost my cousin, Christopher, to the coronavirus, as some of you know. He was one of actually the first people to pass away from the virus. He was a young man. He's my second cousin. He has a young family. And we attended his funeral virtually. And I watched his wife, Michelle, his high school sweetheart, and their two young sons. And I thought, how are they doing this? And I think about their sons a lot. One just starting college, one just starting high school. And I think about the courage that it must take for them just to get up in the morning, let alone to move forward into these new environments that they're moving into, in whatever format those environments take. And I'm assuming, given that they're in New York, that it will be virtual, but still a new environment, not going back to the same school, going to new schools. All of us have had to dig deep and find courage, but not all of us alone. All of our students are having to dig deep and find that courage too. And I guess that what I would want to say is, let's not forget the courageousness in the face of this adversity that our colleagues, that our school leaders, but most particularly that our students and their parents are having to exhibit and having to find. And I've been reading a lot about parents making the decision, am I sending my child back to face-to-face school or am I not? And I think about them constantly and them having to make that choice. So I think that courage is an important word.
The word that I walk away with from this conversation is collaboration. You know, when you think about the fact that we have two people from New Jersey, one from Colorado, Minnesota, Massachusetts, California, different parts of the world, different types or interests in food, but cooperating to come together for a conversation about COVID-19 and its impact on teaching and learning. And so I know that from my standpoint, I'm edified from what I've heard. Know that we at the foundation are here to support you as individuals and as others. And as our founder, James Hunter mentioned, when you have changes in society, it's because influencers get together. And you're all influencers in the classroom, outside the classroom, to your teachers, but also to their families, to lawmakers, to politicians, and to others, but more importantly, to yourselves. So thank you so much for opening up your life and your profession to us individually and personally. A lot of people are going to benefit from it.